Hi, my name is Violent Price. I've been doing mid-2000s style video blogs because I love that era of YouTube. It meant a lot to me. And going back to it, even though no one cares, is kind of about doing it. Like YouTube was always just about making videos back then for the love of making videos. And I want to keep that in my heart. There's no reason we can't just make stupid videos for each other. And I have been taking questions from Blue Sky, the social media site where you can say the C word as much as you want. It's fucking great. And someone named Everett Bevel, one of my cool followers, asked me to talk about my writing process. And I want to say thank you. That's like a super easy question for me to talk about because it's something I think about all the time. I also want to say I've been writing this movie. I've been making this movie for 2 years. And even though my script was done in 6 months, because I've had the time to, why not always be rewriting? Why not always be making it better? Why not? So I've spent 2 years on something that's like a 65-page script. And when you spend that much time on that few pages, it's very easy to get lost in it. It's definitely like a play where there's many levels and every line is significant. And I really love it. And I think it's something that I'm really looking forward to sharing with the world and I'm really proud of. But because it's been 2 years, early in the process, I almost don't remember. That was like lifetimes ago. That was early in the pandemic. You know, when was the last time you thought about the pandemic? Why would you want to? Let's move on. The hardest part is the second part where you do your first draft, of course. But the easiest part of the whole thing is coming up with ideas. Because if you give me an edible and point at me, I could give you 25 amazing ideas for movies. They would all be high concept. I could do 100 for like weird Adult Swim shows that make no sense. That's what I love doing. Like the hard part is the grind and everything that comes after. But coming up with dumb shit when you're stoned, fuck. Like if that were a job, sign me up. It's not. So you have to do all the hard work. Early in it, I remember I had this idea for this movie and I would struggle like writing like just a couple scenes. I had an outline and I'd try to write a scene and it wouldn't work and I'd stress it out and it was miserable. And for months I only had like 4 scenes written and all of them had huge problems. And because I had a little brother growing up who was very quiet and maybe autistic, I've realized lately, now that I have trans friends and all my friends are autistic, looking back, it's very clear, perhaps, that my brother was autistic, although I'm not trying to out him in my video blog. Not that anyone cares or watches this. It's fine. But I got very used to growing up talking at people. I organized my thoughts by just talking, and annoying the people around me who get tired of hearing about my movie. But that's my process. And eventually you get something that's like bad, but at least has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and like a few scenes, and has like a structure and characters to it. And that's like by far the hardest part. I spent more times writing a bad draft than I did any other part of the process, and beating myself up. I don't write like you're supposed to. I think most good writers will say you wake up every morning, drink coffee, and like get at least 1 page done. I don't drink coffee. I don't drink stimulants. I wish I did. My body doesn't like them. But I don't write every day at all. For me, the writing process is more like I start getting the movie in my head and it's like always in the back of my mind. So I write stand-up too. You just have it like in the back of your mind. You're thinking about it. And you're thinking about like the themes and what you want to say. For me, writing is more about figuring out in my head exactly what I want to say, like what my comment is and what I mean. People say if you're not putting pen to paper, you're not writing. Maybe for you, but for me, a lot of writing is sitting there in my head, staring into space, and thinking about like what matters in life and like what I have to say, and like that shit I get lost in for months. And then I finally get to a point where I'm like, I think I have something beautiful I can say about toxic relationships and like the way we relate to people and nihilism and capitalism and all that shit. And then once I have that figured out, I see what has to happen. And then it becomes a lot easier. Like first you have to have a bad draft so that you're thinking about it in terms of the characters and in terms of the story. Like you have to have something to attach it to. But once I have my characters and my story, for me it's very much just saying something, like and using those characters to say it. And hang on, there's a lot to it, so pardon me if I lose my train of thought. Let me see if I can pause here. Oh yeah, and the other way I write is once I have what I want to say, and then I usually can get a draft that's like gone from terrible to simply bad, and has like beginning, middles, and ends and scenes, and like, I'm starting to say what I want to say, then the movie's in my head all the time. Then I'm constantly thinking about those characters. When I'm talking about to people, the themes of capitalism are working their way into conversations. A lot of the media I'm taking in, a lot of the movies I'm watching are like upon the topics of my movie, and I'm always writing shit down on my phone. The way I think about characters is I think about like different versions of myself. Like the two characters in this movie, I'll be honest, are one when I've been scrolling Twitter way too long. I'm having like a bad day. There was some terrible news story, like whatever genocide is happening to my people. And you just feel frustrated and you're just sick of capitalism and you're sick of everyone you know suffering. And then I do like 3 fucking dabs at like 3 in the morning and stare into space and I'm raging. And then I just like write like rage shit, just like things I'm mad about and like things I'd like to do with like my psychotic character, in like as an outlet of like, oh, I'd love to go murder a billionaire. I'd love to go fucking tell a cop what I thought about him. Fill in the blank. And then I get in my phone just like pages and pages of Gmail. Or when I'm like running errands, I'll just think about that, like something I would say when I'm in that mood. I think of characters as my personal moods. And I have like Google documents of like angry, pissed off mood, which would be one certain character. And then I also have another character who is more the state of mind in when I'm feeling very dissociated, when I have sort of my own romantic or personal sexual things. Like when I'm going to meet a stranger from a hookup app in the middle of the night and it's dangerous, like, why am I doing that? What's going on? I have my own shit, you know what I mean? And that's a character too, like in that state of mind when you hate yourself or when you're confused about something, when you don't know what you want, when you feel lonely, like all those sort of emotions. Vulnerability, like mainly just vulnerability and confusion, like a lot of very early transition-y stuff too, but like that stuff ends up in the movie, and that's another character when I'm in that mood. And then I write about like thoughts I have when I'm like frustrated about that, and that's another set of Google Docs. Like when I'm in a certain mood, I write a bunch of shit about that. And then you eventually have like pages and pages of one-liners and like dialogues and exchanges and like ideas, and then you just go through and I just try to plug that in. I'm like, I throw it in. I'm like, here's a funny line, this is something I want, here's a scene where that fits, put it all in. And then you have like a 10-page scene of like hot lines. And then that's when writing is fun. That's when you're just taking things like hot lines and connecting them and like cutting the bad ones and like rewriting them and putting them in your voice. That's when writing feels more crafty, because like you have all the ingredients to make a good salad, and then it's just like, how do I make this flow? And since most of my movies just people talking and having conversations, it's just like, how do you have the funniest conversation? How do you flow with that? And that's that's very much, if I summed up my process in like one thing, it'd be like, get all your hot lines when you're in different moods, lay them out in your bad rough draft, and work on it, and it will get better. And that's the most exciting. That's when your movie starts looking like a good-ass movie you're proud of. When you spent a year trying to think of funny lines for a movie and you get like the best 20 of them after a year of like working on it, and then like it's good because like those are funny lines. And then also I like, as far as like not writing, I write in spurts. I write all like, I don't smoke, but the one time I chew nicotine gum is when I need to make myself like get into the weeds, because although that is very satisfying, that is very much work, and it is very hard to make myself write. So usually at 2 or 3, 4 in the morning when the sun's coming up, I grab a half piece of nicotine gum and I force myself to sit down and I go through my script and I just like nail it. And also like a lot of my movie is not only written like when I'm in bars or when I'm like out with my friends or I'm lively, but I write a lot of my movie during or right after sex. I feel like when I'm having an intense spiritual experience with someone, that's the most who I am, like when I want to say something, when like the world makes the most sense to me, when someone passionately inspires you. I'll just think of something that to me is like a very important thing, like just about being alive. And like I'm always reaching for my phone after sex and like being like, that is exactly the thing. And I feel like writing is a documentation of when you were, as far as waking up and typing at a computer every day. That to me doesn't feel like writing. I respect people who do it a lot, especially when you're writing conventional stuff. But for me, that's just not me. Like to me, writing is like letters from a moment where I'm like fucking stoned out of my mind next to somebody I love, cuddling, feeling like euphoric and just being like, this is what I want to fucking say to the world right now. And I think like a lot of, and then you combine all these different moments that are like letters from these moments together, and then you have something that's very intimate. Unfortunately, intimate. Sometimes you want to make a movie that isn't about painful things you've been through, but I don't know how to write. Like I'm not writing. I'm just writing personal stuff that means something to me. So that's the problem with writing personal stuff is you're out there and you're fucking making a movie where you're having actors act out like your life or like your perception of it or an interpretation of it. Or like, I mean, that's what all writing is really. It's something really personal that you pretend isn't personal. You're like, oh, just a movie I wrote. It's not like it relates to anything. Anyway, but then the last step of writing, which is the most fun part, is when you cast someone and then you rewrite the whole movie in their voice. Because writing is really sitting there and writing down stuff that you hope when someone else says it sounds cool. Like when I wrote my movie with Antoine, you write down you love your script and you give it to the actor, and some things they say sound cool and some things they say sound less cool. And you write a little extra so you can edit out the bad stuff. But like, as much as you love the script and like every line relates to something else and there's themes and callbacks and subtleties and like references and entendres and you've written this beautiful play and you love it, then you're like, oh, now I just have this person who's an actor who's just going to memorize it. Like, how do I put it in their voice? Like, if you have Bill Murray in your movie, you want it to sound like Bill Murray. You don't want it to sound like your innermost thoughts. You want it to sound like Bill Murray because movies with Bill Murray sounding like Bill Murray are dope. And now that it's not an abstract words on a page that I hope sound cool, but it's like these two people, for example, like you listen to how they talk and you rewrite the whole fucking thing so it sounds cool coming out of their mouth. You put it in their words, and that's very satisfying. To like take something you already know is good and then take someone whose swag you admire and like find a way to like take those two things and combine them. Like as you write a script, it gets easier and easier and way more fun. Like the first 6 months were a fucking grueling experience of writing a shitty script. And now whenever I pop over my script I already love, you just go through it and you're like, oh, it'd be even funnier here. Like that's the fun part when you're like near the end and you can be like, what if like fucking Spite put a gun to a cop's head? Like why not? Like that's just like it's so much easier to punch things up than it is to like stare at a blank page and be like, where do I go with this? I remember like early drafts. And also I've gone through so many drafts. The movie started out as a comedy. When I was first writing it, I was writing it with this friend of mine, Alan, who had some ideas for a movie, and he wanted to have like kids who were gangsters and like magical like drug factories. And like the first draft of the movie is like a surrealist kids acting like adults, like nonsense weird movie. And I love that movie too. I look back at that script, I'm like, man, like maybe that's my next movie. But by the end, when you're writing like it ends with like queer breakups and stuff, I'm like, how do I have kids who act like they're Scarface in the same movie with like fucking the most painful breakups of my life, like interpreted conceptually through like a bunch of different filters, like till it means something totally different. And that's the process too, especially when you spend a long time on something. It's going to evolve and change. But anyway, I digress. The bottom line is like my writing process is like struggle with a shitty rough draft and then spend a year smoking weed and just thinking about it all the time. I was listening to a Safdie Brothers interview and he said he'd been working on Uncut Gems for 10 years and how he kind of misses having that voice in his head where like he was just always thinking about that character and like how that character talks and like words that would make it into that movie. And he says he's going to miss it. And I'm going to miss this after this movie because these two characters, well, probably like 4 characters in this movie, are like always in the back of my head. And I'm always like, what would they say? What's a funny way they would put it? And it really does become a part of you, like the voice of the movie, which is like another, like, you're kind of playing games with yourself. One little trick I do is when I hit a wall with my movie, I go through and I change a character's name. Because even though that's totally meaningless, in my head thinking of them by a different name is like almost giving me permission to like do new things with them. You just play these dumb games with yourself. Like it's all just like, how do I get funny shit on a page that means something? And for me, I changed my characters' names 5 times. Sometimes they're my own name. For a while, there was a character named me. Then that character name, I changed that character's name to a name I used very briefly in early transition that I now like find cringe. But like naming the character that version of myself. For a while, like I would write and hate that character. And you hate your characters and you love them. Anyway, my own bullshit, my own internal bullshit aside, the gist of it though, like 90% of my movie, like the serious guts of it when it gets good, is just always having it in your head and always having your phone ready. And always running over and being like, and then organizing your notes once a week. Because I would have a problem where I would have too many notes and you'd have like 10, 15 pages of like bullshit. And like, obviously 90% of it's bad, like to start. And then when you have to go through and be like, this goes in this scene, this goes with this character, it gets very nicotine gum. But anyway, thank you for the fun question. I feel like I did a bad job answering it because I had no plan. And also because it's been a 2-year process. I don't even remember some of the most important parts of the process. But anyway, thank you for that fun question. And I hope this was at all interesting. This one I could go both ways. I have no idea if I said anything intelligent or if I just rambled. Anyway, my name is Violet. Thank you for listening to my longest video ever, 16 minutes of bullshitting about what it's like inside my head. Boom, one of these. You know who that is.